Hello and welcome to Audible River. I'm Alan Rice, and I am very happy to have with me Regan Caruthers, a spiritual mentor, inner life coach, and author of Tragic Magic, a memoir. Hi, Regan. It's great to see you today.
Hey, Alan. It's really good to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. To start off, um, it may not be fair to ask, but the title of your book is very intriguing. So I just, if you can share what your thoughts are behind that title, Tragic Magic. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I remember exactly when it occurred to me to have it as the title. I was writing a sentence describing my mother and what it was like growing up with her. And I wrote, living with my mother was tragic magic. And I thought, oh, that sounds amazing for a title. So what I hope is that it captures this juxtaposition of growing up in a turbulent home. My mother was bipolar. Well, she was convinced she was bipolar. I'm not so convinced. But anyway, this was a woman who dated a king who was asked to represent the United States at the age of 18 to post Europe, who spoke 9 languages and did her postgraduate work at the Sorbonne. I mean, she was remarkable and unable to regulate the power and the access that was her. And so she made really tragic choices from this dysregulated place. And yet, her love and her capacity to love and her presence truly magical. And when she had a hard time regulating her access, then it was truly tragic. So that's why I named it that.
And so obviously you absorbed a lot observing your mom, apparently, observing how she dealt with her own power, her own life, and her own um, tragic condition, let's just say. And so this was, is it fair to say that it was both, it, it, it was obviously it was hard to experience, but also a type of inspiration? I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, sure. Watching her, particularly as I got older, right? I didn't really, when I was quite young, understand it or understand the profundity of what I was witnessing. But what it ultimately did was inspire me to learn how to regulate the same access, the same power that she had, right? So, learning the importance of self regulation and what that means, and frankly, the discipline that is required. My mother was always attracted to the right things. Like she took me to learn, meet her guru when I was 7 years old. And um, anyway, but she couldn't stick with anything. So meditation, right? Eating well, exercise, the things that I feel are just basic to health and to good inner health were practices that eluded her. And so in witnessing all of that, I made a very conscious decision um, that I was going to learn how to be disciplined in my inner life. And I've been tested a lot, certainly, but ultimately, by witnessing her, I learned how to do that.
Well, we make those decisions when we're observing, behavior like in our parents, but it really does get tested when we meet the real world, when we go out and have our own experiences, and we meet people that we weren't expecting to meet, or we have expectations of certain things in relationships that turn out to be very different. And so it definitely gets tested, and so you get to figure out new modes of being regulated. But one thing I'm curious about is in the writing of your memoir, and at the point you are at your life now, when you are going back and you're starting to write about these things, I'm curious about. I'm thinking this. I'm imagining that. Oh, I'm starting to tell a story, but then as I'm writing the story might look different to me as I think about it more. Can you describe that experience of writing about your past and how that experience, how it becomes a new experience to you when you're looking back at it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure it was that for
Okay.
me. Um, I have spent a lot of time and a lot of energy healing myself from the trauma that I had known. So, um, self awareness and self discovery, while that's ongoing, as it related to the book and the insights that I was able to communicate to my readers, um, I'd already, given so much reflection to. Um, that said, going back, particularly in the chapter called trauma, where I'm really trying to synthesize some of what I had witnessed. I mean that was hard because I knew I needed to go back there
Mhm.
if I was going to find that kind of authenticity in my voice that I was seeking for my readers. Um, but I'm not sure I learned anything new other than maybe a deeper appreciation of my resilience and how my conscious connection to God is what truly carried me through.
Oh, that's really key right there. Your conscious connection to God. And but I do want to say right away is that this is a beautifully written book. I mean, you've got the it's the right amount of detail. I mean, the stories all stacked together, but it's a continuation of the important events in your life that get you to where you are right now. And I really appreciate the effort that you put into making this a readable story. It's really wonderful. Thank you for doing that. Um, so the your connection to God. When did you first identify that you had a connection to God?
Well, it was named at my grade school. So, as I share with my readers, I had this, um, I don't know the word, privilege, I guess, of an experience where from the age of 3 until I left the school at 10 or 11, we meditated every day and we sang songs about divine love. And we photographed our energy field with Carillion film. And we also, learned algebra and read Shakespeare and stuff. So I was able to name, right, that connection that I felt so clearly and strongly as a little girl. And what I also share in the book is that it got to a point with my clairvoyance and my access that I couldn't manage or deal with what was coming. And while I didn't blame God per se, at the age of 9, after having a terrifying experience with this entity, for lack of a better word, that used to follow me around and harass me, as I kind of thought of it at the time, I screamed out loud at the age of 9 for it all to stop. And it did.
For it all to
I,
stop, you said?
to stop. Yeah, the veil came down, and I no longer could hear people's thoughts, and I no longer could see things that, typically people didn't. That whole world, that whole access to multi dimensions, thankfully stopped because I did not have the tools um, at that age, even with my magical grade school, to manage it. So, um, yeah, I mean, my inner life was something that was very present when I was quite little, and then I shut it all out, and then it didn't come back until 27. And I'm going to be 58 next week, so I've had, more of my life in that conscious relationship with God than I have, without it. But in that formative time, right, from 9 to 27, I wasn't thinking about God at all.
Well,
And
yeah.
all of the lessons of my grade school, all of it was not in my conscious working memory. I mean, it literally was gone.
Well, interesting to me though is that at 9 years old, you had that power to stop it.
Right.
You just commanded it. So whatever that is with you, you were born with it. You were born with that ability to just say, "I'm not doing this," and that was there when you were a little girl, right? and but but then I guess that at some point, you. I'm just wondering, like at that point when you're 9 years old, you just wanted to stop because whatever that was, this otherness was not a good thing, and so. I know that some people, this happens with some people, right? Some people that are sensitive, that they that they have because there's so much in the world, there's so much in the and this is a very imperfect reality, right? So when we are very sensitive, we can have an experience that's not very pleasant until we feel we have our own power, our own experience to navigate this. So. I'm saying all this because I think a lot of people, if they're honest or they think about it, can relate to this in some way, right? That vulnerability, that awareness, and then going away from it. But somewhere along the way, you needed it back. Is that fair to say?
I think we all need it, right? To know without reservation that you're divine and eternal. Those are incredibly powerful things to know, particularly in this day and age where we're, barraged every day with the next thing to be afraid of, right? So, uh, but it wasn't anything that I consciously intended. For whatever reason, it was just my fate.
Hmm.
And so, in seeing that entity as a little kid that would follow me around, and the last time I saw him, he scared me to death, and that's when I screamed for it all to stop, and it did. Well, at 27, I'm a junior executive in the publishing industry, just wanting a good night's sleep because was working in such a toxic environment. I wasn't prayerful. I didn't have a practice, right? I had like a cocktail or two to go to bed that night. And then literally in the middle of the night, I'm asleep and I wake up. I haven't opened my eyes yet. And I know someone's in my room. I can feel it. Same terror that I used to feel as a kid came rushing back. And I opened my eyes. And at the end of my bed is that same entity that I used to see as a kid. And I just looked at him and I said, "Oh, it's you. I'm not afraid of you." And I went back to sleep. In so doing, right, in truly not having fear, once I opened my eyes and saw what it was, I wasn't afraid. I can't explain why. I should have been, I guess, but I wasn't. But in meeting that moment with no fear, when I woke up the next morning, all I could feel was the love of God. And that lasted 3 years. And I've often joked, and I think I might have even said it in the book, like maybe that's what that entity was trying to do all along, right? Was just to have me, meet it without fear to then fully take it. But anyway, didn't happen until 27. So,
In spiritual journeys, well, I'm not sure if I mean it gets complicated, but I think that the language that we have is really very limited in describing what goes on and what this is and what it really is. But I think I remember reading in your book, there's a you make a reference to like what Luke Skywalker went through when he had to face his darkness, right? So I think
right.
that for me, for whatever reason, I know a lot of people have the experience of needing to overcome something. It's like a breakthrough that you have to face some dark thing, some fear, and then once you do that, it's a power emerges. And what came to my mind when you were telling that just now is I'm wondering if you say you had shut it out or whatever, you weren't like dealing in that world, but probably somewhere inside you nothing stopped. And that, and it brought you to that moment, right? Is that fair to say? I'm talking about your life, but
Yeah, I do share in the book moments of real intuitive sight
yeah.
as post 9 years old, right?
Yeah.
So there was this voice, and I just know that it's the voice of the divine, or at least my guides. Um, so even I wasn't thinking about it consciously.
Hmm.
I mean, I share that story where I'm on the way to the orthodontist with my mom, and I'm looking out the window, and it's quiet in the car. Which, if you knew my mother, that was a miracle in and of itself. But anyway, I'm looking out the window, and this voice says, repeat the ninth grade. Because I had gone to this, school young where there was no grading or grade level. And I was, almost 2 years ahead of myself academically when I finally, was in a public school environment, right? And I was bullied, and I was really small. I mean, I'm not big now, but I was really little then. And I, hadn't developed the way my peers had because, I was 2 years younger than them. And so, anyway, I received that in the car, and I look at my mom who's driving. And I said, Mom, I want to repeat the ninth grade. And she looks at me and she goes, Well, honey, I don't know a thing about that, but you have my full support. I find myself like, I don't know, a month later presenting to the Parkway Board of Education because there was no mechanism to allow a straight A student to be quote unquote held back. And so I made a case for how it was going to benefit me emotionally and socially. And they said yes.
Wow.
And so my second ninth grade was a turning point in my life. And I worked for the administration, and they gave me all lunch hours, and I just took electives. I mean, it was just like a ball. And in having all the lunch hours, I could make new friends, right? Because I had all this time. Anyway, it turned around my adolescent life for sure. And so, in seeing how that turned out, right? The positive outcome of listening to that guidance. Perhaps I was unconsciously more attuned to it, but I don't remember it that way. But
Well,
it was a long time ago.
well, apparently it was an important message that did get through, and it's interesting how those important messages are usually succinct, direct, and they feel different than a thought, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and yes, something. It feels like something or someone speaking to you. Is that how you would describe it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has a certain quality of voice, right? So there's the feeling resonance of it, which you're speaking to. But for me, I just know that voice. And after my awakening at 27, um, everything that I had known, right? My education, the themes of my early education, my access to the divine, the felt sense of God's presence, all of that, um, I continued to carry with me. Doesn't mean that I always made choices reflective of that, right?
I understand that. Boy, we're all a work in progress, aren't we? And we don't understand the consequences of our choices often until after they're made. So that's a,
Right.
that's a
Right.
problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, it's enabled me as a teacher, I think, to have so much compassion for my students because here I had this exceptional, though uncommon, education, right? I had parents who, as you read in the book, I mean, remarkable people, right?
Hmm.
Doing remarkable things. There was an exceptionality to them. And then I have this dramatic awakening at 27, right? But could I still be a mess? Could I still uh, have a day where I lose hope or I lose my temper or question, all of it? Of course. So I think about my students who haven't had any of the things that I just described and how incredibly hard that must be.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I've heard a saying that the greatest affliction is never to have been afflicted, but but that's really talking about life experience, and so and you've had some you I mean, yes, yeah, the book tells some. But one of the things that I noted was the people that come and go in your life, the people, these relationships that you have that seem to be ladders of growth. Does that, yeah? I mean, can you like talk about that a little bit? What does that? Does that mean anything to you? The ladder. I mean, I'm calling it ladders of growth, but these people come in at different points in your life that kind of support different ways.
I don't know. I think of it more like spirals of growth
Okay.
in that it's not hierarchical, right? Like I feel like I often come back uh, to the same traumatic imprint, right? But with a different understanding or a new tool or greater capacity, right? So we don't ever graduate. We don't get a certificate that says, okay, you're good. All of your trauma has magically disappeared from your cellular makeup. No, it doesn't work that way. But I think we can, if we're conscious, take meaning, right? And that might be meaning in a relationship or a new job or a new friend, whatever, and understand through conscious reflection how it all weaves together purposefully, right? But in the absence of a contemplative practice, in the absence of sitting, eyes closed in stillness, asking for, right? And having an intention to deepen your understanding of yourself,
Yeah.
right? I think you have to have that to some degree uh, to make it make sense.
Yes. And you said asking for guidance back there, didn't you? Right. So I think that I would think that somebody who is listening to this right now would probably be the kind of person who has probably asked for guidance. I would think of some kind or another, or questioned their own life and the meaning of it. I mean, these are like normal things that I think everyone has at some point if they're thinking at all. But they it either they either continue with it in some way, but the world likes to suppress these things. I mean, I know that like most of the institutions that we get involved with or jobs that we get, they want to force us into certain kind of behavior. And you know what? It is important that we learn good manners. It is important that we we learn to say please and thank you and how to use proper English to communicate and not hurt other people. All these things are good in order society, that kind of thing. But in the middle of all this learning, it's, it's sometimes the impression is that the things that are most valuable to us are not acceptable, and we don't get to,
Sure.
yeah.
And I think it depends on what eyes you're using to look at it, right? In that, if you consciously connect to the energy of the divine, right? And take that energy into all of the traumatic aspects of self and have an intention to heal and derive meaning from it, you'll get X kind of revelation or outcome. Contrasted with if you're looking at all of it still through your woundedness, right? Your wounded self has a different point of view. and has a different way of seeing the world and making sense of it and creating meaning. So, even your listeners who may be seekers and have a practice doesn't mean that all the time they are in that reflection through their divine self as opposed to their wounded self. And that's part of what I'm hoping my book and the work that I do here at my yoga center imparts is the real need for us to begin to truly understand and connect to the divinity within, and then do that tending from that conscious connection.
That sounds very transformative. You mentioned drawing. I think the words you used, drawing in the energy of the divine, and that is that something that you can do willfully, something you do just by wanting to. How? Yeah, simply, how would you describe doing that?
Well, it's a practice, right?
Okay.
Just like you wouldn't pick up a violin and expect to play it, or at least well, right? Even though you are divine, and if you had to locate that divinity, right, you would probably do this, right? So for me, and what I try to help my students, and what I'm hoping to help my readers, is you begin wherever you are. And every day is different. It really depends on the energy that you are embodying and radiating at any moment in time. And so, in that practice, hands on your heart, connecting with your breath through the heart, and accessing a feeling, right, of love. And how you access that and what that feels like, there's no way for me to know if that's what I feel, right? But what I would say to your listeners is you begin wherever you can. Maybe it's simply having appreciation for something or gratitude, and you build from there. And then maybe it is the love that you feel for your child upon seeing them when they were first born, or your grandchild. Or maybe it's an incredibly transformative moment in nature, right? You have to just think of these moments in time and the feeling qualities of it. And that becomes kind of, to your analogy about a ladder, that does in a way become your scaffolding, right? To begin to raise your vibration so that then the energy of the divine, that transcendent love that is not your egoic experience of love or definition of love, it's something you can't even, like, words don't work, right? So you practice going there, knowing that at every day it's going to be a little different depending on who you were when you started.
Wow.
Right? I mean, I have days sometimes where energetically, even though I know what divine love feels like, I don't feel I can get there because I'm overwhelmed with frustration or um, whatever. I don't know. Am I making sense? I mean,
Well,
a
yes.
practice. It's a practice.
Yes, and so I mean, I think that what I'm getting is that apparently, no matter how good we get at it, when we're alive here, we're still human, and so we're going to have human experiences regardless. Uh,
Well, and
in the
we're impacted by the energetics
yeah,
of the collective, right? And right now, there's so much fear.
yep,
And it makes perfect sense. I get it. I understand it. And we're not immune to being impacted by it. I mean, I remember after my awakening, um, that first morning, God told me two things. I told me a lot of other things later, but two things: disconnect from all media, television, magazine, like, just don't take it in, and eat only organic food, which was hard because that was 94.
oh wow,
So there was not Whole Foods back then. So there is something to kind of our diet, right? Like, not only what we're eating, but what we're consuming in terms of information. Because if you judge the world just based on your experience of day, say you're completely disconnected, you're not on your phone, you're not on Instagram, you're not on X, and you just judge the world based on what you experience, I think for most of us, we would think, wow, what a beautiful world. People are kind and courteous, and the earth itself is so gorgeous, so anyway, and I know that some people's everyday experience is not like that, right? I'm not naive. There are people experiencing incredible violence and inaccess to food or clean water, right? I understand that. And yet they probably have an experience still of someone in their day being kind to them.
And if we are able to focus on that kindness, that experience, I think that what I'm trying to imagine here is how I'm imagining from what you're talking about how we are maybe literally able to create our own experience of the world just by how we're thinking and perceiving. And yeah, you
Yep.
said absolutely. So then, getting rid of all the media that allows us to have our own thoughts, our own perception, right? And just that's where I go with that. I was like, oh wow, that sounds like a great idea, right? So I'm not, feeding myself with other people's biases or inhibitions or fears. Okay, this is really good food
And
for.
what if it is designed to manipulate you?
Well, I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah. Right?
Yes.
So um, I said this in a recent video on Instagram. It's just like the greatest protection we have from that kind of manipulation is to know that we're divine and eternal. Because when you know that, um, you're not afraid of the bird flu or the drones or, the fog. I mean, all the things that, people are consumed with fear about. Well, if you're divine and eternal, it's like you take a long view, right? It's
Yes.
like
Right.
you take a long view, and it's like, okay, you
Well,
know,
you might not stand on the tracks while the train is coming, but you will calmly step off and say, "Oh, okay, that was a train." It's that kind of thing. It's like that's sort of a metaphor that comes to mind about the fear of seeing things coming at you, right? Uh, the
absolutely. Um, yeah. I mean, I learned that right through my awakening process and all the things I talk about in the book. And it was tested more recently, right? When a couple of years ago, after heeding the call to return home to St. Louis from my beach house on Monterey Bay, and everybody's like, "You're going to move to rural Missouri? Like, what the hell's wrong with you?" And and then I get here, and I learn I'm dying, and
oh,
that I have a birth defect in my heart, and God wanted me in St. Louis because my surgeon just happens to be one of the best in the world for the surgery that I needed at the hospital that I was born
wow,
in 1967. Um, so, in facing death, right, and in knowing that there was a chance um, that I wouldn't, make it, and that the surgery I needed, open heart surgery to replace your aortic valve is not a, inconsequential thing. But I had no fear. I just my prayer almost on the hour was just for the highest good, for divine will to be made manifest. I didn't ask, to still be alive. Like I don't know what my highest good is.
uh-huh.
I can feel it, I think. Um, so, in that kind of surrender and in that kind of fearlessness, I think it contributed to me still being here because, as you know, because you've read my book,
Hmm.
sorry, spoiler here. When the surgeon came to see me on my day of discharge, and he said, Regan, there's no clinical explanation for how you were alive prior to this.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think there's a divine explanation for how I was. And clearly, my work and whatever I'm to experience here in this dimension isn't done. And that I
Obviously.
was literally powered by something else because in my aortic valve, you typically have like a $50 for room to flow through a healthy aortic valve. And in my case, it was less than the diameter of a Q-tip stick. It was like a toothpick.
Wow.
And that's why he was like, there's no explanation of how you were here. And I said, well, do you believe in Jesus Christ? I said, and I asked that from a very wide point of view. Uh, he said, I do. I said, well, that's the only explanation I have.
Divine energy.
Again, not the way that we've been enculturated through traditional Christianity, right? Where there's so much fear
Hmm.
in that teaching, but to Jesus's teaching, which is really just two things: love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So
That
the
boils.
law of one and the law of God, right? Which is what I felt and what I carried in my heart into surgery based on my direct experience of that quality of energy. I mean, I'm no Jesus, but I understand what he means.
Well, that's really important. I mean, that to really get to the essential nature of the teachings of Jesus. I mean, that's a spiritual understanding that goes. I mean, there's no theology there. There's no well, the Bible verse says this. There's a deep understanding of what that loving message actually is that touches you. Right. That's what I'm feeling when you say that. Um, and then you said something earlier that got my attention, and that was surrender. And so I was so that seems to be an important aspect of this connection with the divine that you're talking about is the surrendering, and yet the surrendering, the letting go, is very powerful. It's a kind of power, but we don't want to talk about the power. But we're talking about the surrender. Can you like what is your experience of that? Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think to surrender in the way that I mean is to completely dissolve your egoic nature, right? Like um, the part of you that thinks it knows best, right? The part of you that probably you're not conscious of it, but believes in separation, right? Like you are Alan and I am Reagan and we are separate, right? That's the ego's point of view.
Hmm.
And so to truly surrender to the divine means to truly surrender any identification you have of anything else other than that.
That's going to take a long time to think about. So, okay,
Yeah, and it's like and there's a feeling resonance to it.
okay.
Again, words are inadequate
Hmm.
so often in trying to describe this. Um, but when you are consciously in connection with your divine nature and the divinity that is all around you, right, that animates everything, when you're truly connected to that, it feels different than when you're not, right? Like you're not afraid. You have this kind of almost infinite well of hope because you're like, yeah, this is shitty right now, but I know it's all part of divine design, so it's ultimately going to be different and reflective of that. Maybe not in my lifetime, but certainly that is the process that we are going through. And all the sacred books tell the same story. So they probably can't all be wrong, right? They're all saying, so again, yeah, I I try as best I could to describe it in words in my book. And I think my next book is going to be more about the how. Tragic Magic was the story with a little bit of the how weaved in, and the next book is going to be really more about the how and the practices that I created for myself or that I learned, from someone else that has enabled me to do this.
Wow, this is very, very, very valuable stuff to many people. And so if now you do life coaching and you do spiritual mentoring for people, and if someone wants to reach out to you, can they just go to your website? Um,
Yeah,
yeah. So your
yeah.
website.
There's a part of my website called Inner Life Coaching, and they can set up a discovery call, which is just a complimentary half hour to speak to me and for them to feel if it feels resonant,
Hmm.
right?
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, I can do it on Zoom. I have, clients here locally that come to my center for that kind of support. And I also actually really like to just use the phone because even on this Zoom, like I'm looking at myself in that little window, right? And I'm like, my bangs look a little strange, or gosh, I could fluff my hair. Anyway, it takes you out of yourself, right? To be staring at yourself. So sometimes inner life coaching is better just on the phone, right? Where we don't have that as a thing. But yeah, there's many ways to do it. Or, pick up my book. It's cheaper than inner life coaching. And I think there's a lot of wisdom and practices in there that could help your listeners.
I agree. I totally agree. Well, Reagan, this has been an amazing conversation. I always love our conversations. And I would encourage people to go to your website, regancaruthers.com. I'm going to put a link in the program notes. And your book is available to purchase there, yeah, and on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. And it's called Tragic Magic, a memoir by Regan Caruthers. And
I
so
think what it looks like.
oh, okay. Yes, there. I can see it. Well, this is audio only, so we're not going to be able to see it. But you know what? I can maybe. Well, I'm definitely going to put a link to this so people can go to it and see it.
It's a
Though
pretty cover,
it's a
isn't
very,
it?
it's a very pretty cover. I was impressed with that. I love the woman with the what is that? Like a supernova in her chest, and she's a galactic entity. Yeah, right. I love it. Yeah.
Just surrendered, right? Arms
Oh,
wide,
that's what.
looking up,
And then the
and her
energy burst open.
yeah, and her heart is just illuminated, and there's darkness all around her. So
I
yeah, that is me
That's
for
you.
sure.
Well, that's a powerful portrait for sure. Well, Reagan, again, this is wonderful having a conversation. I love these conversations that we have together, and look forward to our next one.
Well, thank you so much, Alan, for your support and for your interest in my work. It means so much, and I love talking with you. The time just flies by.
Yeah, it
So,
does, doesn't it? Yes. Okay.
okay.
Well, that is all for this episode of Audible River. And wherever you are on this wonderful planet, we would love to know what you think about our podcast. So please leave a comment or email us at audibleriverpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.